Lecция, I think we should start. First of all, I need to say that the work that I do, especially this kind of abstract work, like yesterday, it's almost impossible to give examples in this kind of presentation. That's a pointless endeavor. So, because of that, I will focus on a few other topics that I can indeed show, and showing them makes sense, even with a small beamer and a relatively casual situation like here. And it's basically about, let's say, background, and I hope I can sort of make you understand how a work like what you have seen yesterday, if you have, otherwise maybe in 2 days, a work like Driftline Blue, or a work like Model 5, which is by now quite old, or a media-art work, has been developed. Now, in case of Model 5, of course, that's not my personal work. It's the result of a collaboration with Kurt Henschläger, who now, like me, works alone again, and again means already for 10 years. But during that time of granular synthesis, we started with figures and later developed an abstract language. But I will not go too far into the granular synthesis or too much into the granular synthesis area, although I will give you one example of that. Instead, I will start with, we take the journey all the way back to 1976. That was the time when I already started to express myself artistically, and I cannot give you the sound experiments I did at the time because there is no example of that. But I have luckily a few remains of the absolute early drawings I did, and they are indeed relevant because this kind of surrealistic, weird comics already I mean, of course, at that time, like so many young people, I had my fictions with the society, which happened to be a heavy-duty communist regime, and I lived in the city of Dresden, which I felt was particularly narrow-minded, mainly because of the fact that West German broadcasting could not reach this area of East Germany. So people believed in communism because they didn't hear anything else. I was originally born in Wolfen, which is an industrial city, and like from every direction was another poisonous fume. So maybe not the ideal place to live, up, but there was one big advantage with West German TV, and that everybody was talking about, of course, all the stuff that they have seen last night, and it was always West German TV. So what was like a basic setup for me, the world is divided into a reality, and reality only happens in black and white on the television. I was convinced this is the real world. And my world is actually a mockery. And so the images that came from the television, I believe that they are the real thing, and I think that's important. So here, this is Dresden. It actually came from the image comes from the Prager Straße, which is like the main street, this big Lenin sculpture and all this. And instead of now fighting with everybody, trying to portray myself as somebody who doesn't want to be a part of this society, I made these drawings, and the monsters represent the madness, maybe. And obviously the monsters are not very happy. Another example would be something like this, where I imagined myself sleeping somewhere and all this stuff. So this was the kind of drawings. I don't need to go forever on this. I also did collages. And then I went to the East German Army, which was again not the time of my life. I mean, from that perspective, Dresden became like the epitome of a desirable place. And there I started doing colorful painting stuff like this, which might indicate, first of all, that I was a great fan of Franz Kafka, but also that I tried to see this kind of bleak world that I imagined from a also very unusual perspective. And another one which probably indicates that I felt this whole world that I was living in, and not watching any TV anymore, which means like not being fueled with truth, whether that was true or not, being so stripped off from all this. I felt that does great damage to me, and the kind of surreal comic translation of that was this absurd cancer thing. After the army, things changed. They changed in terms of that this surreal imaginations were replaced by a different approach to find reality. And reality was not the slogans everywhere, reality was, I felt that reality is maybe in sound, which I immediately started to investigate again. I had lots and lots of instruments. I didn't intend to show you this picture first, but it might indicate that, so I looked very different. I had all the necessary elements of a guy who is not in sync with the government. So I was immediately labeled as the weirdo. So that was necessary. It was cool at the time. It's a bit embarrassing now. But it opened a lot of doors. For instance, in terms of sound design, because the Protestant church in East Germany was not, first of all, a place of spiritual enlightenment, although that was the original purpose. It was, first of all, a shelter for all kinds of people who had dissents with the government and seek support. So because I looked like that, I was labeled as a good guy for the church, not for the government. And so they allowed me to play, for instance, on church organs. Now I don't know how to play a church organ. I can't read notes up until today. And I was never interested in the concept of organizing pitches in a more or less intricate manner in order to achieve melodies and harmonies. So what I did was I fixed all the keys that I felt should be fixed, stayed them, and played with the stops. I don't know if you know, like in traditional mechanical pipe organs, they have so-called stops that you pull out, and when you pull them out, you open the gateway for the air to go into a certain kind of, into an array of pipes that you can now play with your keys, and that gives a timbre. What you can do with an old mechanic pipe organ is to pull these stops only halfway, to give these pipes just a little bit of air. And that was a way of creating quite haunting sonic occurrences, drones, cloudy, mystical drones, because there were lots of overtones. And then, of course, I discovered the possibility to even switch off the engine altogether and switch it on again. And when you switch off the engine, then the sound starts changing. And yes, this has nothing to do with electronic sound design, which became my big obsession later on. But it was creating, and here is the connection to what I'm doing now, it was creating sonic textures, sonic spaces, without the idea of playing an instrument, because I didn't really play it the way it was meant to be played. But that was a rather secret affair. I felt I can never show this to the public. Public performance at that time in East Germany, you had to go to a special committee to get an approval that you can play in front of an audience. In order to do that, you had to present 3 songs, and East German music, pop music or whatever, was soaked with sad meaning and complicated structures, musical structures, just unbearable basically. So that was impossible for me to go this way. So I said, okay, I am a visual artist, and the sound thing is my private lust, which I do while the others sit in a meeting discussing how to get rid of the communists. I was in the church playing the organ and doing other things. So being a visual artist at that time and looking for truth meant to start drawing old people. That has a practical reason, because I had already applied to relinquish of the East German citizenship, obviously with the intention to leave East Germany to greener grasses. So I couldn't study anymore. But the law said I have to work. So I found the same job like everybody in my situation, caring for old people. It busied me for 2 hours, and the rest of the day was free. And I already knew how to live on very humble amounts of money. So I met all these old people, and that is what I did. I started drawing them. So this was the most realistic, if you want to say, part of my artistic practice. Like this. I'm afraid I keep uploading. I wanted to show you without all this screen stuff, but it happens to occur on my computer, not over there. And then I tried to change it the other way around, but there was another problem, so you still see what's going on. So these old people were alone, they were sick, they had pain, they expected death any moment, they wanted to die. And I was very often the only person they saw the whole day. Like this lady, when I found her, she was basically lying in a stinking room where all her dried poo was all over the place. And I couldn't get anybody to help her. It was just awful. And she told me all she wants is to die. And exactly that happened later, while I was still there. Like this lady on the left, she always said, I want to die, I want to die. And then we did these weird things. I said, come on, you need to get up. You're not yet dead. So I didn't make fun of it, but I kind of tried to engage with them on some sort of meta position. I said, like, I didn't question it. I said, I know you want to die. And it's probably, but at the moment, you're not. This happened later on again, like I remember on Ars Electronica, there was a young lady who we all knew, and she had schizophrenia, and doing that Ars Electronica, she was completely spaced out, wandering around wherever she was. And everybody was a bit shy because the business was potentially endangered. So I just took her and said, hello, this is Stacy Spiegel, and this is Peter Weibel, and I just couldn't really, I didn't take it serious. I just felt she's still the same, and I always, for me, these things are not so, they are very, very important and the core of my interest, and at the same time, I don't feel alienated by it. Let me put it this way. I'm attracted and afraid, but I'm not alienated. So, the guy had Alzheimer. This is a good example of this, what I just said. She died 2 hours later, and the pastor and the daughter and everybody was there, and I was, just about to bring the food as every day. And then she said, and then the daughter said, you don't need to come anymore, my mother's going to die tonight or today. And I said, yes, but I'm going to leave East Germany very soon, so I have my drawing utensils with me, I would like to draw her. And I was still able to convey that to her. And what I said is to her, we both know that you are going to die. I didn't make a big, and I'm going to leave, so this is the last time you will ever see. And I would be very blessed if you would allow me to spend a bit of time with you, and then I can draw you. So that's what I did, and she was quite happy about it, as much as she was still on this planet. And what I felt is that these people, and they are already dead, because I also started to work in a place for mentally, severely disabled children, which was next to an old people's home. And I felt that these children and these dead bodies in the basement, that I felt they cannot be reached by all this mockery that was all around me, all this pseudo-reality. This is real. So I started drawing dead people while I was looking for these kids. This is again, I showed that before. I left East Germany eventually, and then started a new chapter. My drawings became very stylized, so it's a bit like into this surreal thing. Here comes, out of order, another of the previous ones. So this is the new kind of drawing I developed, and more I started to get interested in something I hadn't come across before as a topic so much. I was more and more interested in younger bodies and relationships. And, while I was painting, and I sold the paintings and I bought synthesizers for them, because now I could buy them, they were available. So this is how the drawings had changed. And I was up until recently had a fellowship in Hong Kong at the City U, and I was teaching such different topics like sound design, time-based art, and life drawing. And the life drawing came from years and years of drawing, which I did everywhere, not only in East Germany, but also in Göttingen, where I happened to be at that time, and later on in Vienna. And my paintings became very realistic, and maybe not from today's point of view, I don't know what to think about it, but that's what I did, and all this happened in a very small room, because that was the smallest and cheapest I could get. And all the money I made and that was quite some money. With the paintings, I didn't invest in any better lifestyle, I just bought this machinery. Synthesizers that were, in a way, as surreal as these drawings that I did earlier on, because for me that was like my personal luxury, and every real musician couldn't afford them. But they knew how to make music. I didn't know how to make music. I believed I don't know how to make music. But it didn't stop me from buying these machines and with these paintings. And this was one of the very few concerts I ever gave at the time. And still, up until then, this was all my personal hobby, maybe. I was not aware of a context in which my sound research and my notion of creating sonic textures could become a part of my public artistic practice. There was not much public anyway. I sold all my paintings not via a gallery. I didn't have any exhibition. I had two fans, a very rich guy in Wiesbaden and a gynecologist in Göttingen, and instead of saying, oh, why would you like to buy this? I said, I need to sell you this, and I need to sell you this for 5,000 Deutschmark. And he said, what? Yeah, I said, but yeah, I need to buy a synthesizer. And I don't know, I was obviously convincing with that strategy. They bought the stuff, and I kept going to the synthesizer studio Bonn, which was at the time a very famous shop for electronic instruments, basically funded in connection with Kraftwerk. They produced all the early instruments, or customized them for Kraftwerk, and they were the biggest and most wealthy and most luxurious shop in East Germany at the time, long time ago, bankrupt by now. And when I came there the first time and I saw all these machines, I had this, they were so desirable because they promised me, you can do, we will realize your dream, and they were very sexy. So I wanted to have them. So I kept on painting because I liked to paint. Of course, I didn't do that in order to just to get rid of them to these sponsors. I really loved to paint, but there was this other obsession, which was not the obsession with the body, but the obsession with the structure, which up until then, I never even tried to find an appropriate translation into visual creation. Visual creation was for me always and only body. So, I went to Vienna because Göttingen is not really the place for an artist. Vienna was the place because I met Kurt already, Kurt Henschläger, my partner in granular synthesis. He happened to be there as an exchange project between Vienna and Göttingen. And he said, what are you doing here in this place? Come to Vienna, that's much better for you. And so I did. Again, painting style changed. For the first time I had a big studio, but still paintings were bodies. Like, to give you an idea how big this is this sort of playground. This is the painting we just saw. And here's all my machinery. That was like my holy altar. And so I made these kind of photos too. And I started more and more drawing. Again, but the drawing style changed. It became more minimal, easier, not so obsessed with the notion of expressing something. I did this, I went 3 times a week to the University of Applied Arts, just for drawing. There were many interesting lectures, like Roy Ascott was at the time there, but I couldn't speak English. East Germany was not the place to learn English. But in Vienna I met this English painter, and he said, you can stay with me, and if you stay with me, I give you room, I give you a job, you can paint for me, because he was into this business of painting huge walls, the fun fair for clients, and of course I knew how to do that, so I made money now painting for him. These are drawings, and then this was my next job, doing these kind of paintings, buying more synthesizers, doing more sound, still all very secret. You know, I had my studio, of course, but it wasn't yet a public thing. The paintings changed because I did these colorful murals. I suddenly was not interested anymore in doing something in color myself, and also my topic became more sinister again. And I started reading books about psychiatry and collected images of dead people and people in epileptic seizures and all kinds of stuff, and changed that into paintings. So images like this, anorexia, became painting like this, or this, a painting like this, and so on. Epileptic seizure images, eventually like this, or portraits of all kinds of emotionally and mentally disturbed people were turned into images like this. Four self-portraits, again referring to this earlier medical interest. Because when I was younger, I actually wanted to become a doctor, medical doctor. And yes, in that time when I was drawing these corpses, I even checked the possibility to become a pathologist. And then they told me, but as a pathologist, you're just busy with a microscope. It's all about tissue. You will never really have to deal with corpses. That's their assistants for that. They're always drunk, and they prepare the corpses, and then they get you that stuff. And if you want to do this, you don't really need a lot of education. It's a year, and then you can do this. And I felt that's not a really interesting prospect, so I said, okay, forget about it. I don't want to become a pathologist. I don't want to do microscope. I was interested in death at the time as a fundamental aspect of our existence, or maybe even more than death, the fear of death, or the near-death situation of some kind. Not the near-death enlightenment, like these near-death experiences that people report when they are drawn back into life. That was not my interest. My interest was the state of people before and after. And the state of people before and after is, I think, indeed something that still interests me very much, especially the before, the tension before, in many aspects, the tension that is developed in anticipating a dramatic change, which means there's maybe the promise of something else, but there's also the fear of losing everything that was so far, which is our identity, the construction of me. That is probably going to be lost. And that is a very scary aspect for many people. So this is how this painting progressed. And these are paintings I did at the time, and so you see the topic. I didn't need corpses anymore to paint such paintings. And by the way, they didn't sell. But again, I was looking for reference, like in this painting, another very big painting. I was interested in body language. So I did it because I found images of concentration camps. But I didn't, for me it was not so important to, you know, all the atrocities and the horror and the political aspects and the incomprehensible brutality. I was interested in the effect on body language and how body language reveals exactly that without a context. And another aspect of this was medical photography. Because I had I had this interest in medicine. I had a lot of books about medicine. Like when I was in the East German Army, I got every month the only magazine for medical doctors available in East Germany, which half of it I couldn't read, but I was very much interested in the images, because again I felt that is true. That's not the place to do a lot of blousy communist words. That's straight down to the point. These people are really sick, and how can we heal them? But there was an aspect in that I found very interesting, that these images themselves humiliated the people that were photographed. Images like this. And I felt that was almost like a standard. I didn't understand at the time that photography is not a representation of reality, but an invention of reality. And what the reality that is invented here is always the same. These people are ignored. They are the carrier, or they are displaying some sort of disease, and they are overlooked as people, as persons, the doctor is not interested in that, which also is highlights maybe the approach of Western medicine. And I was fascinated by these images. I collected them. And I collected them because of the look of people, because of their body language. Like this guy here later became a painting, which I hope I have here. So I think the disease behind that, I just learned that recently, is called Marfan syndrome. And now for my teaching, I keep collecting images of bodies, especially of stunningly, overwhelmingly beautiful people, and people who have all kinds of diseases, which in a way are like fractal disorders. It's like there's something wrong in the formula or something, a glitch, and then you could score that. Of course, it sounds cynical, but it's not meant like this. It's not from a moral point of view. The nature invents then this kind of creative approach to the body. But that's a different discussion altogether. For me, and even this image, which I didn't have, I just downloaded this a week ago, but why on earth does this man have to stand like this? I didn't get it. And obviously the idea behind that is humiliation of some, maybe as a subconscious thing, I don't know. I don't understand it. Why do these images always have to look like this? That was because here it was about the, I don't know, the adolescence of change from child to adult, puberty. Why such pictures? I asked myself these questions. So I went on drawing, painting, and these are the, just to give you an idea. And then I started drawing more, but before I show you this, that was the machinery I had at the same time, which was, it's always a parallel world. But at that time, granular synthesis was already invented, like Model 5 that we are going to see in 2 days. That was the setup where I developed the sound for Model 5. And those who know a little bit about synthesizers, they can see that there are super machines like a memory MOOC, MKS80, a microwave. All these are machines that were the result of my of funneling all my money into this obsession. But I sold it all later because I said there's no point in having hardware. I have hardly any hardware anymore. I don't believe in it. And now we do another jump into this kind of drawing. That was the latest I did. I started drawing just grains and then multiple grains. This is from Vienna and this is already from Ghana. And this is what I'm going to do next. So, I said until then I didn't do anything abstract. And yes, I didn't. I will instead, before I show you these abstract paintings, I will show you another stream of my work, which was photography. And in photography, I tried to find, for the first time, answers to the question, how can I use an apparatus to liquefy the body, to dissolve the body, to tackle that border between the alien world and me, the skin. In painting and drawing, this is easy. It's an intuitive process. In photography, it's of course intuitive again, but there's an interface which requires something like how to do it. And I was of course totally familiarized with that aspect, because in sound design everything is about how to do it. There are symbolic surfaces, even synthesizers is a symbolic surface, and there are parameters, and you have to change parameters in order to get sonic results. It's not a direct intuitive process like whistling or playing an idiophone, which are instruments that make the sound themselves, like a gong or a xylophone. Of course, even in traditional instruments, there are aspects of how to do it. Meta instruments like a piano or even a pipe organ. And even a saxophone or a flute has already this aspect, because you have to know how you have to hold your fingers in order to get a specific sound. But it's still very much intuitive. In a camera, you have to know how the material behaves. Of course, it wasn't a sensor at the time. How the let me show you the image. How the aperture behaves, the lens, the light, the connection between light and time. So I developed these ideas. How can I connect light and time in order to dissolve the body. And I started to work either with myself, cheapest model at all, and some dancers from Vienna. But that's not really interesting so far. What's interesting is this, because I discovered that if I use a lot of light in the background, then I can cut off whole chunks of the body. The light becomes like acid. The light devours, literally devours the body. Every part of the body that has moved during a longer duration of time, and exposure time is about half a minute, is gone. That was super when I discovered that. So, but of course, the process is now, it's like that I make it. I don't create these bodies. I press a button on the camera, or with the remote control, wait for half an hour, anticipate how it might look, go to the laboratory at that time, there was no sensor, wait for a day, and see the result, which is a surprise. So it's like I work with the camera and the dance, and I'm only a third of the process. The reality of her moving, the reality of my setup made to create something like this, which is to a certain extent unforeseeable, and just a miracle of the camera. Eventually, again, it was me, and when you compare this image with something just 5 years before, you can see that I learned something about how to do this, not this one, sorry, this one. Because now it's much cleaner. It's not anymore this Viennese, heavy Nietzsche and Kafka and Freud world and the medical stuff. It has become kind of sober, but also more enigmatic, because it's all and only about light. It's not anymore about explicit nudity or faces making weird expressions. It's just being in front of a camera, having all the light available in the background, and wait, and move, of course. And that's the result. So, in painting, I eventually moved one step further and started to develop abstract paintings. Originally coming from, and I just showed you this, I just quoted here again, this image that I didn't talk so much about. In this one, and also this one, I started to develop this running down technique. And that I found so interesting that indeed I created images just with that. And they are much darker. This is a translation into this projector that it can somehow be shown. They're almost, it's a very, very dark blue. And again, the material of the pigment and the reflective qualities of the paint, that is something that cannot be revealed here, because I used very little binder, so they are fragile, and it's all about the white light, and then you can see this black-blue weighing out of blackness. Here, this is all amplified in Photoshop. They are basically black. Now, this is not amplified in Photoshop. This is just gray. But what you can see is that I started to become very systematic in the format. And that's another one. And that's the last abstract painting I did in the early 90s. Because all these what I showed you now are like the last attempts to pursue my own work, but it was not possible. Granular synthesis, the media art group that Kurt and me invented in the early 90s, took all our power, because it was, and it was not about the aesthetic creation. It was not time that we have spent on editing suites. It was all about management. It was about writing applications. It was about talking to people. It was about writing stupid, pointless texts about something that didn't even exist, which I totally hated, because I didn't have to write an application for a painting, and I didn't have to write an application even for a synthesizer. I just did a painting and got, so I was in this luxurious position, never to deal with something that is quite normal for a media artist or a director to deal with the necessity of funding, of financing a project. We created projects. And that took so much time that all this other thing just couldn't happen anymore. And in granular synthesis, we started with bodies again. Now, I cannot talk about the aesthetic and personal position of Kurt when he embarked on this collaboration, which was totally different. I can only highlight my contribution, not with the intention to say, oh, well, he didn't, but I just talk about what I did. And I give you now an example of an earlier work which is related to Model 5, a video that I created with Akemi Takeya, and I just realized, oh, my desktop is full with all these old images. So I will close them all while you watch this video. It's about 8 minutes long. And it was, so to speak, my first collaboration with an Asian dancer, and I have been working with dancers from Japan, China ever since. something will always be there now. I tried to close them in the meantime, but it started to flash, so I said, okay, don't close, we just go on. I would like to show you two more videos of collaboration with two dancers. Before I do this, we go away from the bodies for a moment and go again into the abstract world, because there is techniques of this dissolving and several techniques of how to create interesting surfaces, and also how to create surfaces that seem to not be very interesting, yet they are. And I give you an example of my digital image creation. And when you see something like this, this is obviously not very interesting, because these 2.50 meters by 1 meter something printouts with 400 dpi on a super poisonous process, Chrome or whatever, it was barely, hardly available nowadays. I tried to invent something that I felt makes sense as a digital image. And the only way to show you what is in there is to make a journey through the picture. And it starts here on my side, so you have to stop the journey. I enjoy it already, but I guess you want to see it. In the creation of this kind of image, I also discovered, because you have seen some artifacts, you didn't mind the artifacts because you have learned to accept them as an inevitable part of every kind of presentation, all the pixelation, all the excuses about bad sound, and all the time somebody says, oh, if you would see the reality, it would look, and instead you only have, so on and so forth. Artifacts are very interesting. And of course, artists like Carsten Nicolai and Yoshi Ikeda and others who have invented or have discovered in their aesthetic research digital artifacts as an aesthetic, or as the basic of an aesthetic vocabulary. They are a good example for the fact that there's a problem doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, but it has to be seen. Just to ignore it is not a good idea. Like, instead of saying, oh, these good old synthesizers, they made such a fantastic rich sound, and now this boring software always sounds the same. One could argue this. But by the way, these good old synthesizers, when they came out, for Blue for instance, they were accused of creating like icing, cold, unhuman sounds that are an offense to our nature. They were everything but warm. Now they are the epitome of warmth. And instead, the new software is supposed to be cold. And then people like these two artists I just stated, they said, yes, and that's good. I think a sinus wave is something that cannot be perfectly produced, or at least not perfectly reproduced on an analog record. You need to have a CD. And then, of course, it's still not a sinus wave, it's just some sort of little steps. And if you zoom into that, you will find out it's not a sinus wave. But all this is interesting. It's not something to condemn in hi-fi magazines, it's interesting. I found out that visual artifacts created just by the software itself, by the friction between the resolution of the image, which is high, and the resolution of the output window, which is low, can create all sorts of effects. If it's just lines, of course, it's moraine. But even with noise, and that I found quite interesting. So this is another example of such an image that you saw, a still image. And the movement you see is automatically created just by zooming. And because I zoom, more and more pixels of the source image have to be squeezed in or pushed into that amount of pixels available in my output window. So the software starts to come up with some approximations, and the effect is that everything seems to move. Now this seems in a way not really connected to all this body and psycho and whatever kind of obsession that I seem to have, but it has something to do with the interest in truth. What is really true? True is that we love pictures because we love to look at them. We love to look at things, and we love to look behind things. We want to see the truth. I mean, in every aspect. And visual art is all about the lust of looking. And at the same time, we always look at something that is invented. And not a representation of reality, but an invention of a reality. So, that's done. Well, now this one starts. So I was interested in what is really digital creation. I cannot ignore the fact that I have only 25 frames a second in PAL. I cannot ignore that high definition, which maybe a couple of years ago seemed to be great, is a very limited amount of pixels in comparison to a painting. Of course I can say it is limited, but that's exactly what I have. And that's not necessarily a limitation, but it is exactly that. But that is what I need to understand. It's not good to say, oh, I have this idea and now I'm going to print it out onto some film or whatever. I always, at least in my case, I always need to understand the nature of the material. The same way I need to understand the nature of a pencil and a paper and the connection between my brain, my hand when I draw. The fact that thin paint will run down and thick paint will stick. I need to know these things, or of course even more so in a camera. I need to understand the material in order to create something that can only work if the material that I use is really in sync with my ideas. And so a lot of what I do really comes out of thinking about the material. I do not think about anything I was talking about so far. I never think about that. That seems to be like the big background noise anyway. It's a bit like the Kafka thing, you know. Whatever he writes is always the same story. So he doesn't need to think, oh, maybe what should I write today? It just starts, and another poor guy who ends up in misery in some way or another. So this kind of monothematic, ever deeper circling towards whatever might be there, at least in my case, is the core of my artistic practice. So I do reflect on materials, software. That's what I think about most of the time, and that's what I normally like to talk about. But I thought, in this context here, I will not honestly bother you with reflections about software. But I will give you examples of how this thinking about software, what this can do, and how I try to preserve something that I find interesting in reality, although I can't see it anymore. Like in what we just saw in Model 5, in Sweetheart, this piece. Of course, you could see all the reference to what I showed you before, but it's also about a complete invention. Akemi Takeya had never had to suffer in any way in the creation of that movie. She just performed for a while, and I picked that stuff. Of course, I told her, can you please scream, and all this, yeah, okay, good. 1 hour, done. And then I use, and it's true. Every frame is true. It's not invented. It's not Photoshop. It's not After Effects. It's just that frame. Yet, it is completely invented, including the sound, because the noise of the background is amplified. Her scream is compressed so that this artificial sonic environment created. But in this case, at least you can still see her. I went. This is with sound, and again, you know, you just click and then. So this is footage from the market in Africa. And this is part of what you have seen yesterday, if you have seen it. And it's directly, it comes from there. So what I'm interested in is this movement. But I'm not only interested in that movement. I'm also interested in the fact that I was hiding that moment. It's a bit like our fear of death, you know, everything will be lost. Yes, it will be. Nobody would ever understand where that material is. But it's, for me, it's interesting that I started. Of course, it doesn't always have to be so personally related. Sometimes I just find something and think, okay, wow, let me use this. And here's another example. Wow, it even starts in the right place. So this is from the internet, the sun. So what did I do? I changed it, direction. I stretched it over the place. I expanded it. Dissolved it. TX transition, artificial sky, and all this. And this is the result. So this is the direct outcome of this thing. And another example would be a movie like this. horrible music is enough reason to stop this. This is what I made out of it. Since this is not a PowerPoint presentation, you have to bear with a few funny moments. The 3D reality that was created out of scanned surface of the Mars was not interesting for me, but I found it interesting to create this feel of moving forward without really knowing what is there. And this kind of image creation I do a lot, sometimes my own footage, sometimes other. So this is a little bit of a background to what I do digitally. I try to give you at least a few moments of work with dancers. And the only part that could be really interesting here is their dance. Because what you see in the show, like in the last show, Movement C, it's impossible to, I just talked to a colleague a couple of days ago who saw it, and it is impossible to capture it. It's either too dark or too many flashes or whatever. The eye can see a dancer, the camera can't see anything, and whatever the camera might see, the sensor, is a relatively pointless thing. But there are parts in these shows that make sense. So I show you Movement A, that was developed with Toshiko Iwa in Africa, where I used to live at that time. Only the beginning. So 19 minutes, and we have to skip a little bit. So people come in. I like to start, not always, but often to start in a way that suggests something different, like in what you just saw, that video, Sweetheart with Akemi Takeya. It starts like a funny techno-pop thing, you know, like four and floor, so okay. And then suddenly, of course, very 90, and then suddenly it stops and it goes somewhere else, and it's maybe not so funny anymore, but I thought that's interesting to start with this kind of thing. And here's the same. She sits there, or she moves there. Still the same. I also did the meta choreography, so I told her what, but I didn't do any further because she's such a great dancer. I didn't need to. present, which you cannot see because it's sometimes very sudden. So there's video projection, light projection. The space is sometimes more impressive in terms of visual sensation than she, but of course she's super impressive. Because whatever she does is very haunting. And we were talking about involuntary movements. Of course we were talking about epileptic seizures, torture, orgasm, involuntary movements of babies when they are in the first days or first weeks. So it's not necessarily negatively connotated. It's about, and she has had education in releasing involuntary movements in Hawaii. So she knew how to do this in a, or how to call this up and to do it in a certain frame of an artistic creation. So the space is now full of pixels. This is even later. So at the end of the show, she does even less, and the space is now fully animated with strokes, with fluctuating light, with fluctuating video. But this part, as you can see, is rather pointless. So here you get a bit of an idea. You see this, so it's a different performance, but like just the main stages. Like this is the earlier one. I told her not to do these gestures. And you can see that the space is drifting, constantly drifting towards a center where then nothing happens. All the lines are already, because it's interlaced recording, and the flashes are, I don't know, somewhere, so everything is just pretty messed up. And a good example of the mediocrity of technology, or that every technology has its own rules, and you cannot just grab reality, you can't scan reality. So, and the last for today, I mean, her costume, for instance, is, we were thinking about, okay, I need nudity, but she cannot be nude, because people always, there is always this curiosity that you can't get away from. I mean, when you look at images like this, there's a whole I mean, the lust of looking that I was talking about earlier on, here obviously pretty much obscured, but an image like this deals with this, all the lingerie, and this is an Annie Sprinkle performance, which is basically exactly dealing with this idea, to look. So what we were talking about in our performance was how can she be as naked as possible without people constantly, almost involuntarily, looking at her in a, let's say, in a sexual connotated way. by just making her as neutral as possible, but not ignoring the fact, or maybe revealing a different kind of nudity, a deeper existential nudity. And that was, it's a topic for me that I'm often thinking about. How to, in reality, how to create something that is as bare as possible. A bit like these self-portraits with all the light. As little protection as possible, without coming up with sensations that have nothing to do with what I really intend to say. So, last image, that's a 3D image, and I have to describe. Sometimes it's more interesting to describe a show than to show some images, because movement C is eventually impossible to show. The first part is a mother-in-law from China this time. She's on the floor, again, involuntary movements, very minimal, but slower and very sexual, but nobody can see anything because it's mostly dark, pitch black, and sometimes red light is also fluctuating, but other than a movement A, you really have to look and your eyes have to become like owls to see something. And the flickering of the red light plays with the pupils, so the image becomes very unreal, very unreal. The sound, of course, is massive. I say of course because usually in my case the sound is massive. And then in the second part, suddenly you have a big 3D image. And this time you can see everything. You can see her. For the first time you can actually see her, but she isn't there anymore. It's just a 3D image. It's in a way empty. So what I'm showing you is a part of the 3D image. And that was what I was interested in. What is real, the image, the lust of looking, the thirst to see something. for much longer. But it is, again, it only works if it is big. You have to imagine a screen like this over there, and for the first half of the show you couldn't see anything. And this, this feel of silence that you already might have had when you listen to the sound, which I haven't really talked about much except my East German organ adventures and the process how to acquire my synthesizers. But the sound design itself I didn't talk much about. And the reason for that is that this is even more, it's in a way a very dry talk. It's all about material, it's all about how to do things, and then again what I do is creates always a kind of a similar feel, because that's what, it's not because I couldn't do anything else. I even did pop songs as a fun project in Vienna, but I'm not interested. What I'm interested in is the creation of number one, and that I indeed said before, structure, consistency, temperature, liquidity, extension in space. That's qualities how to describe sound. And another one is an emotional, let's say, tuning. So that there is a sense of silence in space. I find silent spaces often very unsettling. People, I don't know, decide and make noises, and it's very uncalm. And if you have a sound that is not distracting attention by events that move around, 20 loudspeakers and then from here to there, I can't stand this kind of sound stuff. Because, yes, of course we can do this. I like to have just a field which feels almost a bit heavy, maybe even a bit unbearable. And you have to accept it. And I do not intend to hurt people or to challenge people or to bring people to some kind of extreme or to border experience. I'm not interested in that, zero. But I like to create a situation where maybe this inner guy who keeps commenting all the time while you experience art already say, that's not so, that's interesting. That this guy just shuts up for a moment because you just look. And look also means with your eyes and all your senses. Not as a spiritual sort of journey, but as an aesthetic encounter, or as an encounter with an aesthetic creation, which is not meant to entertain you. I think it is very important to entertain people. Otherwise, if you are just boring, it's pointless. But entertainment is eventually not a good thing as the final. And there's a very thin line between entertainment and an experience of a different kind. And that is something I am interested in. I'm eventually interested in what I was saying in the beginning, and the word beginning indicates that I come to an end. When I was talking about this close to the end, there is this wall, and this wall is an end and at the same time a promise. And behind that wall there's a different world, a world that, for instance, is explored by artists like James Turrell. The other side, the purity, the perfect purity and the perfect beauty in absolute meticulous settings. And when you already have that promise in front of you, but you are not there, then there's a lot of tension and maybe a lot of fear. And this is something I'm very interested in, this area. But I'd like to find answers to this area in the work. I would never normally talk about this, or like if I show something and then immediately after any questions, I wouldn't do that. But I think it's interesting because I showed you this other material to say, because I realized that just recently that I get less and less interested, or the other way around, I'm more and more frustrated by entertainment. And I really try to find ways to keep attention. I hate to bore people. It's because I hate to be bored by art, and I'm very often bored by art, especially by art, I have to admit. So I hate to bore people, but I like to have full attention, but at the same time I don't really want to give anything. Especially something that, oh yes, this was an interesting moment, yeah. So, the more you say, oh, what was that? And what was that about? But again, and I think this is maybe a good last sentence, I'm not even interested to do that to any audience. In a way, I hate performances because the audience raises tension, which is good, but also gives me that strange feeling, now I have to, I like to do it eventually just for myself. So if I like it, then it is good. And if I think it was bad, and then everybody tells me, wow, that was the greatest I've ever seen. I don't think so. It has to work for me, and I am eventually the only audience, and maybe sometimes this one other person that sits there. My ideal performance situation is one person in the room, and I do it for you. Not for that person, but for you. I imagine you are that person, or you are you. And all the others are gone, they just get on my nerves. And now I give you something, now I tell you something. And at the same time I just do it for myself. This is eventually and finally the ultimate performance situation that I think would be great. So any questions? I think I kind of try to give you a picture, but if you have questions, I'm more than happy to answer. And if you don't, and you want to have a break first and ask later, that's equally fine. It might need to be structured somehow.
Very complete piece.
Yeah. And if you don't have questions, that's fine.
Well, it seems like no questions. Thanks.